Hello and welcome. This is Mark Silver with Heart of Business, and I am so delighted to be on this call with my friend and colleague, um, Pam Slim, who is absolutely miraculous and incredible and magical in a lot of amazing ways. We've known each other for 15 years,
Long
something like that.
time.
Long time, a
Long
long
time.
time. You stayed in our home when our boys were babies,
I
and
did.
it's and now they're teenagers. So if that speaks to anything, I've just been a fan of hers for a long time, and we're here specifically to dig into her book, The Widest Net, which is your third book, correct? Or
That's right.
fourth? Third
Third.
book, yes.
Hmm.
Won't get ahead of myself. Um, and um, and it's really an incredible book. This book, The Widest Net, unlock untapped markets and discover new customers right in front of you. It's a smart, profound, big-hearted book about helping your business reach people, which, we help with all kinds of folks about developing their business, and marketing continues to be the biggest thorn. And this is just such a beautiful book. And Pam has a tremendous amount of experience, interviewed by top media, multiple books, thousands of clients, doing this for years and years, in-person experience, virtual experience. I mean, I could go on, but I'm wanting to cue this up because I want you to really listen to what Pam has to say, because she's been really successful. I've been a client of hers, and she's just tremendous. So please welcome. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you.
I'm so glad to be here with you, my brother Mark.
So this book, can you, I'm sure you've said this 1,000 times in all the many interviews you've done about it, but can you tell us a little bit about um, what sparked you to want to bring this out? I mean, it takes a lot to write a book, and, Escape from Cubicle Nation and Body of Work, your previous books. Um, what prompted you to want to spend so much time and energy putting this particular book together?
that all my books really have come from the direct work that I do and I've done with clients. When I started out as a blogger, which was like a thing. It was a noun back in the day. Now we just think about it like it's a vehicle for like cross-posting stuff on your website. But back in the day when I first started the business and transitioned from being a management consultant into coaching people at Escape from Cubicle Nation, one of my wonderful clients, Pete, who happened to be in Arizona at the time, he was working as a software developer for a local company. And he was one of the few people I used to meet in person. And so we'd meet at Starbucks. And he would actually print out my blog posts. So he had like a printed out version that was all highlighted and he put stuff together. And I remember one day after a couple months of coaching, he was like, could you just please write a book so that this can all be in like some kind of order? And it was just, you have those beloved clients who are just so, they, he really paid attention to the kinds of threads that I was talking about in the different areas and was really looking for this cohesion of how things fit together. And so that really has been the driver behind all of my books. I didn't start out thinking I would ever be a writer of writing books. It was one of these magical mystery tour things that really came from my journey blogging. And that's how my first editor, Emily Rappaport, found me, who was at Penguin Portfolio. And then as I wrote each one, as I was doing the work then and processing it and going through these wonderful cycles that I can't wait for you to go through yourself with your own upcoming book, but
Yeah.
where you first have conversations like this when a book is first coming out and you talk about it and you're anchoring in the core stories, and then it begins to really live out there in the world and you begin to see how it's an idea that becomes part of the other business ideas. And then you can begin to see where the gaps are. So I know with Escape, I was so excited, as I always am, to help people start and run a business. But then we had a few years after that, all these folks who were like, you can only be cool and creative if you work for yourself. I was like, well, no, that's totally not true.
Right.
Tons of people work for others. In fact, if you grow your own business, you're hiring other people to work for you. And so I really was looking for, where is this way we can be looking at our careers and our life's work in a framework that was work mode agnostic. So it could be open to people who might move among and between corporate and nonprofit and self-employment
Mm,
and staying at home with kiddos and all that. And that's really where that work and body of work came, is how can we have a way to look at it so that people can feel liberated in evolving their work through time and not feeling shame of making a choice one way or the other based on the
right.
work mode. So
Yeah.
that's really how body of work came. And so if you think of, Escape really was helping people to leave corporate to actually just begin to have a viable financial business, but it's rarely the last stop. That often evolves. Body of work is really saying, here's what I want to do. And people got much more clear. This is the kind of work that I want to do. And then every single question for every client, including myself, as I had new things to bring out, is, where's my audience? Where are my people? How do I build my business? And for me, it was really going parallel to that long time work. My degree in college was actually in community development, looking at grassroots economic development and non-formal education as a tool for social and economic change in Latin America.
Mm,
That was my focus area. So I've always been really fascinated by education, in
yeah.
particular non-formal education as a tool for social change, really coming from the grassroots, coming from the people themselves. And then the parallel path that we can talk about a little later is just work my husband and I were doing here at our Cav Main Street Learning Lab, which is an in-person physical space where we did all kinds of community engagement. And so, it's that, like, I always think of Pete. There are my clients too who might look at me through Zoom as we're doing sessions, and I'm like, well, here's the idea of an ecosystem, and here's kind of things you can do. And they sort of get that same look of like, but could you figure it out for me? And could you create some of the worksheets? And can you see how it comes together? And that's usually where the whispers of an idea for a book start to really take form, where it's like, this is a whole thing that fits together.
Right.
And that's really where it started to evolve.
That's beautiful. I think it's true, because one of the things that struck me about the book, um, one is like how much our work at Heart of Business and your work are like totally in alignment, which I'm not really surprised about,
No
but it's like,
shock. I know.
yeah, I know. And I'm like, oh yeah, this is, and I love like because one of the banners I wave is like how, there's MBAs for larger businesses, but there's very little process oriented stuff, systemic stuff for smaller businesses
Yeah.
and tiny businesses. And I love how you've put it all together in such an approachable format. Like there's like it, like they all link, all the pieces linked together in a way that just makes sense, because it does.
Mhm.
And there's a lot in this book, folks. I really encourage you, and it's very readable, and it's I don't, maybe it's not fair because I've been in this industry for so long to say it's a quick read, but it is. It's like it's fun to read. Like you tell
Yeah.
so many stories that illustrate it, um, that illustrate the points, and you make everything so clear that I'm like, that's lovely. That's really lovely. The pieces that I since I'm doing the interviewing and it's all about me. No,
Yes, it
um,
is.
I want to focus in on is that when you get to the near the end of the book, really the end of the book, you're talking about ecosystem, and can you talk a little bit about this idea of ecosystem and what I mean? It really is in reaction to something that we've seen as a reaction isn't fair, because ecosystem is the original idea and the other things are the abnormal, right? It's like,
Mhm.
why do we have to call organic food organic? Can't we call the other food toxic? But it's like, it's but if you can talk a little bit about ecosystem and how that arose, because I think that to me is the container and the framework that helps to hold all the other pieces that you're talking about in the book.
Absolutely. So there are two metaphors that makes me think about. So one is just the reaction and probably just doing so much deeper day-to-day work around equity-based, like inclusive community building and economic development, which is what my husband and I have done here at the Main Street Learning Lab, of just looking specifically at that work. My ears are tuned for empire-based language, just beginning to pay attention to like what words do we use and why do we use them and what are the metaphors that we use, which has been so wonderful. I always love being really precise with language. I love language. I was a big reader growing up, and my dad was a writer and an editor. My sister's an editor. So I've always loved
Mm,
words, and I love a precision of words. That's why I always kind of um, raise my shoulders when we talk about being like politically correct or people policing language, because I just think actually we're just trying to be very precise with what language is and understand the connotation and the emotional repercussion that is based on the power of words, which we know in the spiritual context is so important when we look at prayers and songs and things we love. So let's be really deliberate about it. And a lot of the language within the business world is empire culture language. Literally, I want to build my empire. I want to crush my competitors. And when you think of historically what empires have been, especially colonial, based empires, it is very, very destructive, very much just power at the top and lots of labor, most of it unpaid forced labor that happens for the vast majority of people participating. And it's like that's kind of what happens in our overall mainstream capitalist society that we know. And so part of it was like where I understand, and it's also the power of language, where in different communities certain words that have been historically really dominant in a negative way can feel empowering sometimes. So I just want to name that, like as a white woman, I can have a different historical relationship, like coming from the colonists and the colonizers, that it can feel different for a black woman, for example, or a native woman, talking about really building something strong and powerful. But it's kind of fundamentally that model doesn't really make sense to me. And a lot about what you talk about in an empire is centering yourself, bringing everybody to you, building something really huge. And I think what's more natural is if we look at the ecosystem in which our ideal clients generally already live, what's in the center is our ideal clients, customers, beloved customers, whatever kind of word you use for that. And when they're looking to solve a particular problem, so if they're trying to build their business, which is what you and I help them with, very likely I've divided like an ecosystem wheel into 10 different places, kind of 10 different lenses. They're already often working with a whole variety of different service providers, coaches, consultants, accountants, lawyers, copywriters, graphic designers. They're listening to different podcasts. I listen to tons of different podcasts that are all giving me different insight and little twists and turns. They're using different products to run their business. They might belong to particular associations and groups. And so my premise in the widest net is if we just really begin to understand the ecosystem that already surrounds the who our ideal clients are, that's where you have these watering holes. You have places in person and online. And it can be like a podcast where in one conversation, an hour that you and I share together, all of a sudden I can have a connection and begin to build a relationship with folks who I may not have known before, and they might not have known me, as opposed to sitting here, in my desk yelling out at the internet, like, please, everybody, please find me and come see me. It can be
right.
very efficient to be showing up in these very deliberate places where other people have already organized communities that are solving similar problems.
Yeah, I love that. I love how you describe that because, there's a lot of different language for this, but the ecosystem does make a lot of sense. I've used the word tapestry, but I like the aliveness of the ecosystem
Hmm.
language that you use because it really is, because it also grows and changes. And um, it's really hard to add a thread to a finished tapestry, but it's really easy to kind of, you know, bring more life into an ecosystem, and the diversity is helpful. And so you can we can think of ourselves as invited and welcome rather than, trying to thread something into something that's completed. So it's really beautiful. Um, I know that there are a certain number of people that we work with, our
Mhm.
clients, who, of course, are, love the work they do, but they're not so, I don't know if we want to use the word extroverted or social or what, uh, how do you, uh, how do you help people who are maybe less oriented
Hmm.
towards creating new relationships?
Hmm.
What's been your approach to supporting them in creating some, where maybe a term like the widest net might, like they might feel more like a deer in the headlights? I'm curious how you work with that.
Yeah, exactly. Because it is the case. I work with people that have all different kinds of strengths and interests and orientations, to their own personality. So a lot of what I think of, and if we just think of the metaphor of a garden as like a mini ecosystem example, um, that in if we really want to have a garden in order to, produce food that we can eat or, beautiful flowers, like we it needs water. It needs sunshine. It needs earth that is capable of taking care of it. And it needs somebody to go in and do the planting and all of that. Like that's just, there are certain parts of it that where you have a business, you sometimes we get lucky and there's just some kind of unique flow of somebody else sending you work. And I've known plenty of people that way, which is great. If it happens, like awesome.
Mhm.
um, Other times, if that you're very passionate just about the craft itself, you love to do just, the smaller work with clients in your business, which can be so powerful. First, just recognizing that for my business to be whole, first of all, my business is a separate entity from who I am as a person. And of course, it's related, it's energized and activated and often has shared values. But especially if you work with more people in your business, it is not necessarily you individually. So a lot of folks I work with, as we start to look at the activities that might be necessary in order to understand the ecosystem surrounding your ideal clients. There's, a reason often in, book titles, of course, we want to have a little bit of like curiosity. And what do you mean? Like widest net can be, what? You mean you should never have a niche? And it's like all about just more and more people. That's really not what the point is. A lot of it is
Mhm.
when you begin to look out and you recognize, wow, there really are all these kind of amazing, rich sources of referrals, potential areas where I could find clients. Where are the most strategic places for me to really make a plan for saying, here are the kinds of places that can make the most sense, for connection? For some people who have a natural orientation as connectors, who love to build relationships, who can hold, I called it kind of having maybe a larger wingspan in terms of just the number of relationships that somebody is energized to hold, that and I would put myself in that category. I
Mhm.
can hold energetically more relationships than many of people in my family and also in, friends and clients. So in that case, you really evaluate, okay, I see these areas that can make so much strategic sense. I know who I am, what might be good ways that I can be, begin to reach out and share. And it's including things like a beacon. I have a chapter on beacon, which is part of the model, where I might have a way, a newsletter or a podcast, some way that I'm sharing my information with the world that is a
Mhm.
good way to bring people to you. That's a lot of how I built my own business, starting with my blog. But when you know that and you know the particular strategies that you undertake, then you can plan according to what you want to do and then what it is that you need in your business. So sometimes you have another team member who could help you. Some people end up, building a model where they realize I don't necessarily want to be in direct like business partnership where I'm actually sharing a legal partnership with somebody, but it might make a lot of sense to me to have what I call a peanut butter and jelly partnership with somebody where maybe I'm a web designer and I just really don't like the
Right.
business development side, but I want to work with a marketing coach who every day is working with clients that need a website. And we can actually create like flow where I'm getting clients and I am getting getting new clients in my business, but I'm not proactively the one who's doing it. And maybe it's beneficial for that marketing client. Or, people might recognize they just need to hire others or do more work around, SEO or ads or whatever the different strategy would be. So it's, it sometimes is that, it's the tough love that I look at myself in the mirror and give, and I think also talk to other clients about, or it's just love. Part of it, whenever I'm curious what your thought is when I hear somebody just say like, I just hate marketing.
Hmm.
I don't like that whatsoever, but I really have these goals for my business. That's the part of really having that loving conversation of like, let's talk about this. Cause like you can't have a loving partnership or marriage without communication, and acts of
Right,
service. And the same kind of thing is going to happen for your business.
right. I think it is really important. Obviously it's important, but I like what you said, because there's a lot of our work at Heart of Business is about helping people see the reality of what it really is instead of their pictures of what it is,
Yeah.
which is a lot of what I liked about your book, about how it's talking about all of these different pieces that actually make the connecting so much easier.
Yeah.
um, because when you have all those pieces in place that aren't the relationship building yet, the relationship building is easier when you have those pieces. And I think, and so that's a piece. And also just understanding that, oh, like, it may sound like playing with words, but I think that, like, I'm with you in that words are really sacred and they help us in the reality that we're creating. And it's like if you're using empire language, then those are the languages, those are the relationships that can't help but impact the relationships. Something we do at Heart of Business is we don't have to work that hard at it, but we're very strict with ourselves about when we talk about clients, we don't say anything inside our team that we wouldn't say to a client. We
That's
use
right.
language that's really in integrity no matter what.
Yeah.
Even if it's like somebody, sometimes people are in a situation where they're struggling with something and they're in a reactive place. I've been like that. Like I yelled at my kids the other day. It's like
Yeah.
we all, and so we try to bring compassion and understanding when people are like that. Um, and so, when you use empire language, that's the kind of relationships you can't help but have. I don't think you can talk about I'm building an empire and then turn around and say, "Oh, I'm being loving and equal with my partners, like my business partners." Like I think that there's always going to be a disconnect in that awareness. And so yeah, so the ecosystem language I think is actually an important part of how the relationship is built. So I was really loving what you were saying.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah. It is interesting to me the first parts of the book. It's kind of in thirds the way that the method goes, and again, it really in so long of actually practicing it and then putting words to it and then figuring out the order.
mhm,
The parts early on of really understanding your mission, understanding your values, and then really understanding who your ideal clients and customers are. It's so essential. So much of what you talk about, what you really embody as you go through the journey of not only just marketing and being visible, but also doing the work itself, is so related to the seriousness and the sacredness with which you take into consideration what is that work that you're really doing, or who
mhm,
are you, what do you aspire to in terms of your values. What is a way that you're going to have a particular way of looking at the world, making decisions, walking through difficult situations. And like you said, we can all have our just natural human moments where we might feel petty and jealous and snarky and angry and all these natural healthy emotions. But as that kind of washes through us, and you think of what it means, and we've all seen this working among and behind the scenes in many companies, it has such a big impact when you begin to then think down the road of how a company can grow and scale. If you've had a company that is really, really toxic inside, where people are
mhm,
not respected, where values are not cared for, where you might publicly say glowing things about your clients and then behind the scenes you're saying really unkind things and dehumanizing them, that can't not have an impact to use a double negative. Like, it has a very, very big impact in what you do. So sometimes we just like, let me skip past that, just give me the part where I can know how to, put some things in action just to get more and more people arriving at the door. And believe me, that's super exciting, and I love that, and love to see the growth path. But the part that will be enduring over time, and then when you do begin to really activate lots of work, what has happened so much with a lot of people who were the case studies in the book, were my real clients and friends, is when you really begin to do it and practice it over time, all of a sudden it's like, oh my goodness, like the opportunities are so many. How do I sort through them? That's exactly when you need to lean back on, what are my values and what are ways I can look at other, partners to begin to share that work, potentially expand the team if that's the vision, or refer to others if you want to keep it small.
Right. And both are really powerful choices depending on what's in your heart and what's on your path. It's and I just want to hmm, it's easy to kind of jump on, but I just wanted that to drop in because it's something that is so important to have the kind of like the other pieces in place for to be able to step into those ecosystems. It's interesting. We just bought a 15-acre property that we're living on now, and we're doing all this planting. And one of the things that I've learned that I hadn't known yet is that black walnut trees put out this, the root system puts out this substance called juglone, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, which is toxic to a lot of plants. And it's not toxic to other plants. And you kind of have to know what can grow next to a black walnut and what can't. And so, we planted, we've just put in these new persimmon trees because persimmons can grow next to black walnuts. And there are other plants too. And, but anyway, I want to, I want to highlight and encourage folks in hearing what you're saying, that, and I know this because, again, our work is so much in alignment that if you go through the steps of Pam's book, by the time you get to the ecosystem part and the reaching out, it's going to feel easier and more natural, especially if you're clear about where you grow well and where you don't grow well. Because, if you're not, anyway, just taking a lesson from the natural world, of course. I like what you said there. The other piece that I wanted to get into, God, there's so much we could talk for hours, of course. This could be a year-long course. Like, and I don't mean to make the book sound overwhelming, because it's not. In the very end of the book, and I guess I'm doing that because it's interesting to me personally, and it's also kind of, I wanted to whet folks' appetite. But it's like, you talk about connecting authentically at scale. And it's at the very end, it's like it's on page 229, right before, 246 is the end of the book. And I'm a 5-planet Virgo anyway, so it's being precise. But a lot of our clients, have really small businesses, tiny businesses, and they really value personal connections, as I know you do. And I'm just curious what if you can expand on this piece about connecting authentically and I know scale can mean 1,000 different things, but I just like, what are some of I know some of it is kind of natural to your personality, but it's like, you do have this way of holding more relationships I've never felt like a number or just a, like a marketing contact to you, even though I know that you're in contact with thousands of people, anyway, I'm curious what you have to share about that.
Yeah, so I think to be very straightforward about it and to give some concrete examples. So there can be sometimes when we talk about, growing a business or more like connecting on scale, it can mean sometimes being on a bigger stage. So literally, and whenever we can do that again, and you can still do it virtually, but you might be used to having a webinar where you have 20 people who are there, and then you do a partnership with somebody else who's doing a lot of recruiting for the webinar, and you have 3,000 people who are showing up as opposed to 30. And what's interesting is it really can be the very same interface. You can still be on Zoom and you can still be sharing, but there can be that internal process. If you're thinking about it all of a sudden, like, I'm on a much bigger stage. There are all these people. I don't know who all of them are. Are they judging me? Who's going to like me? Who's not? That begin to mess with you. And really, a lot of the being prepared for bigger stages, opportunities, like literally more people, more one-to-many experiences, or maybe you're in conversation with people who you've really admired from afar, and you begin to actively build those relationships and get to know them. I think both you and I both had that experience of like, well, I thought you were just going to be somebody on my bookshelf. And as it turns out, there's somebody who you really develop a personal relationship with. The quality of connection is really more and more, it's you just being as grounded and anchored as you can in really understanding who you are and really being present in the moment with who you are. I work so much directly, work is sort of a weird word for it, but just being in relationship with my husband, who's a traditional medicine person. He's Navajo. And so his work day in and day out with people is really just helping people to be extremely present with the present moment and not like worrying so much about the past or what's going to happen in the future, but just really becoming very aware with what the present moment is. And then when you're doing that, also beginning to see much of that beauty and power and just that magic, when I know you have such a strong spiritual practice, but that feeling we can get in a spiritual zone when you're really present in the moment, how you can just feel like that love and vibration and magic and colors and everything begins to expand. That's, I think, where we can create some of these really amazing connections, and that's really based on your own understanding and your own practices of really who you are and trusting yourself enough, no matter how big the stage is or how big things get, to really be radically present. It's why I feel so passionately about having a link with the mission at your roots, as I call it, and really the anchors of why you're doing the work, because that does create often that very strong emotional reaction of like, this is hard. I mean, it can be harder when you're busier, when there's more demands on your time, and when you're called to be expanding your craft and sometimes like really stepping up the way that you normally might prepare for something. You have to really deeply understand and name why it is that you're doing something. I use the example of one of my beloved friends and favorite clients. I hate to say favorite. You're all of my favorites, but you know what I'm saying. Somebody who we just resonate so much in our work, Heather Krause, who's the founder of We All Count. She's a data scientist, and she's created this amazing platform and team and whole training initiative of helping data scientists reduce bias in data science, of which we know there's tons. And she is such a self-proclaimed introvert, and she would make me laugh so hard because she's hysterical. But as we were doing the early stages of work, we started working right from the very beginning in her initiative, and I'd give her these exercises of like reaching out to have 15-minute conversations with other ecosystem partners, and she would just be like, she said, if you want to know how much I hate connecting with people, she's like, I've spent my whole life avoiding community. And she said, if the Starbucks in my local neighborhood begins to know my name, I will drive 10 kilometers to another one so that they don't. We would just laugh hysterically. But she would say, and she does love people, but at her heart, but she would just always come back to, I know why I'm doing this. This is so important. This is legacy work. And it's just been so astounding to see what she built in a relatively short period of time, 18 months, 2 years, a thriving, amazing organization that's trained thousands of data scientists and works with all kinds of major, foundations and academic institutions. and it's always easy when you're kind of reducing it, right, to like you can see the results over time. She put in so much work and brought so much already in her body of work to that work. But I just really love to include examples like that in the book because I remember those very specific conversations where it was like,
Mm-hmm.
this feels so hard to have three 15-minute conversations with people. Like there was nobody on her mailing list. There was nobody, the training wasn't built yet. And that's how it can feel at the beginning. But when you hold the mission and you really do believe in it, and then you prepare yourself to be radically present and love yourself deeply and be deeply grounded, that to me is the way that you can begin, to hold. And then the other piece of it is clarity and boundaries and knowing what you do and don't want to do. You don't have to be constantly in contact with people. You could have 7 people in your annual plan that are the perfect ecosystem partners that you would be the only ones you really, nurture throughout a year. And for some people, that's the right number.
SubhanAllah. I love that. I just like to pause to kind of let that sink in for folks. I find that there's a lot of business books and marketing books when I read them. Even me, at my level of experience, I notice that it starts to activate this kind of nervous, like, oh my God, I got to get going. I got to, like there's like
Yeah.
a feeling of lack. And I don't feel that in your book. And I think a lot of that comes out at all. I just, there's a lot of places I'm reading, I'm like, and I feel like that's what you were just saying is at the heart of it. And just that there's space to be who you are, and there's space to find your own path forward, and that there's room, like we're all needed, and that it's not a competition, it's not a fight, it's not a, you know, exercise in colonizing or empiring or attacking or anything. So I love I love what you described, and I
Mm.
really love you for it. Thank you.
Well, I will say that huge blessing from the work that we've done here in community. One of the really deliberate ways that we began to open our physical space, I just felt a visceral reaction to the reason I did it this way. But we call it listen first, is what Daryl and I started to call it, here. We spent years, we created a physical space that we support by the day-to-day work that we do. So for our community partners, we don't have a financial model for people to use this space. And a lot of it was just very deliberately because we didn't want to be introducing a whole bunch of like complexity around that, of like event rental and forms and all that. It was like, let's just really deeply listen, understand what people are about, what they want to do, and just make it simple, but not be pressured into immediately make a decision. Because I had so many conversations and a lot with my white brothers and sisters who might come in from traditional institutions, and they're like, well, what's the business model here? Are you an incubator? Like, how are you funded and how are you making money from it? And it's, hey, we need to make money. I understand that in a business, but it's like, that's not really what we're doing here. The purpose and the intention of creating a community space is really to hold space for others who can feel fully themselves and explore and experiment in a place that historically has been very damaging to them. And from that, as we get really deeper into the work, and when you can just slow down and not feel pressured for always like making an instant decision on certain things like that, it means that, of course, there is this deeper, much more expansive benefit that comes from doing the work and developing an understanding. I'll always say, even if there's not a direct financial model, so far, for the vast majority of time that we've been here, you can better believe that there's been huge benefit to my work, to, work that I've done, to, all to the book, to having permission to tell folks stories, to be able to be deeply engaged. There's always going to be that reciprocity that happens. And so the part of it that is just over time that has becoming so clear to me is really, when you do have that vision of like, I believe in what it is that I'm doing and I see that I want to have this work out into the world, making time in a context that works for you in the business to be doing some of that planning, to do the analysis, to take the space to figure out what can I do, what can't I do, knowing everybody is going to have a different level of like resource and skill and network and all of that. That's the part, like it doesn't just happen. Active community building and network building is really deep work that happens in these tiny seeds over time. And to be strategic about it, you need to take the time in order to figure out where to spend your energy. Otherwise, you're just exhausting yourself. We've all been there of just, let me try this and let me try that. And I'll do a Facebook campaign and I'll send out these emails. And I go to this networking event that didn't really feel very good. And it just ends up not really going anywhere.
Right, right. Ah. So beautiful. Really honor you and all of this that you're putting out in the world. It's such a blessing. And yeah, and I'm grateful. As I said, we could spend a lot of time digging into all of this, but in just buy the book, folks. Buy the book. It's a book. It's a book. It's a book. It's not signing your life away. It's not a $10,000 weird program. It's a book. Buy the book. Seriously. Oh, it's too. So
and there's some resources to it as well. If anybody wants, I have a no need to trade email or anything workbook. So sometimes I know folks may not like have the time or not necessarily readers. So all the exercises for the book I have in a PDF workbook that's right on the
beautiful.
book page, which is pamelaSlim.com/the Widest Net, all one word. And so that's where you can get some of those tools. And I know I enter books different ways sometimes. Some people like more of an audiobook, but like you're saying, Mark, it's the intention, I think, behind the book, first of all, is really just to articulate and give voice to say that we can build a model for building our business that is highly collaborative, that is highly interdependent, that doesn't need to marginalize, and is really including all community members and building something together that feels really good and supportive. So just to normalize the fact that that is possible. The other piece is to say, in this overall map, if there are certain areas that you might see, you don't necessarily have to start, at the beginning and go through, experiment. Maybe there's a, recipe you have in the seeding chapter around tiny marketing actions that you could just test and try different things, or begin to apply some of the ideas. It is always the balance of the kind of a book that isn't just giving one small slice of a tactic. And that can be really helpful sometimes, just to like learn really well how to do one thing.
Right.
Let yourself take in like the big picture and then really zero in on, for the way I know my business, for the way I know myself, where are some of these areas where I feel that I might want to dig in to do the work, and just to know it's there as a resource for you. But applying, all of it for me has been my whole lifetime now, 25 years in business. I'm still learning every day. I'm still doing it. And that said, there are some really practical things that hopefully can feel supportive and help you make a difference.
All of that. Yes. Yes. And that's awesome about the PDF workbook. I hadn't discovered that yet. So there's already a link. So go check it out. So yeah. Anything you want to add as we wrap up?
I think that's about it. We're here. My focus this year in my business is actually just really leveraging the model and doing more teaching and group programs around that. So that's part of what you can find here. We're going to do our first in-person retreat in October 2022. So crossing our fingers, all is well and healthy, and we're able to do that. If not, we'll figure out an alternative. But that's one thing I'm really excited about, is so much of the story of what we've done here is bringing the model alive with real live people who are amazing collaborators and partners I have here in downtown Mesa. So for folks who learn better up close and personal and hearing real conversations, that's going to be an exciting opportunity to connect. But all of that is available on my site.
That's amazing. Yay. Well, it's been a pleasure. As always, thank you for having this conversation with me about your book in public, so to speak. And yeah, anyway, I don't mind hawking it. Buy the book, guys. Get the book. It's like, even if you don't like books, you can still enter it. It's really easy to read into pieces. You don't have to read it in linear format, like she was saying. I didn't. Um, and yeah, just feels like another piece of the weaving of beauty that we really need in healing um, this terrible predatory capitalism that we're in. And I'm just grateful that I'm grateful you're in the world and you're doing this. So,
Likewise, I one of the phrases I kept saying over and over in writing the book and then bringing it out is we all need each other. And I know in my own work that I do, there's no way I can ever fully support my clients with everything, all the tools they need. Just yesterday, I was teaching or Saturday, Consultants of Color Collective. There's a group that's emerging here downtown, and we're talking about pricing. And I said, my friend Mark Silver has this really cool, resonant pricing exercise. And it was so exciting to be able to share that with them in the format, the way that you've openly shared it, with a blog post, with a recording, with a PDF. I do that all day, every day with so many peers and colleagues that are working with others. So I always wish that everybody has just, first of all, recognizes that we all, so much of us share and work together. We have such a big circle of colleagues that traditionally we would be looked at as being like competitors, sort of going after the same clients, because often our clients are trying to do the same things. But that's not how I see it. And I know that's not the way you see it. Like, the bigger our own circle can be to support each other, the better the work is, the more ease we feel when we go through our hard times, which we all do. So I really want that for everybody listening, like to form your own partners and take what's useful to you and pass on the rest, and just keep looking for the very best you need to help strengthen your own business.
Amin. It's a wonderful wrap up right there. All right. Well, blessings to you all. Thank you for spending this time with me. And thank you to Pam Slim for this wonderful work. And I just wish the best to you and your business. Peace.